use of open source software is not completely unrestricted. It will still be subject to license conditions. And there are many different open source licenses. Some open source licenses are very basic and they don't place many restrictions on how the software can be used. They might, for example, say that you can use the code so long as you give appropriate attribution to developers of the open source element. On the other hand, other licenses are a lot more restrictive. They may require that any software created using or incorporating the open source software is licensed on the same terms as the initial open source software used. They may require that the source code of the software created using or incorporating the open source element is made publicly available. In the context of M&A transactions or investment involving a company whose business is reliant on software products, it will therefore be key to understand what open source software is used, how it is used, and which licenses apply. The purchaser or the investor wants to ensure that the business model of the target is viable, essentially that the target can make money from its software offerings.
The scenario everyone will want to avoid is that the target uses OSS in a way that infringes any open source terms or prevents the target from deriving income from its software products. If open source software is identified during diligence, then this will be an area where a purchaser or investor will want to drill down to make sure that the software does not pose a risk to the target.
Some examples of commonly used open source licenses which might come up in diligence are the MIT license, the Apache license, the GNU General Public License, the GPL, and the GNU Lesser General Public License, also known as the LGPL. These are just the most common examples, and there are plenty of other licenses out there, and they're all different.
Generally speaking, the MIT license and the Apache 2 license are less of a concern when they come up in diligence. They are permissive, more business-friendly licenses that don't impose strict conditions on downstream licensing or making available the source code. Presence of GPL and LGPL licenses can be more of a concern, or at least require taking more of a closer look, because these licenses are more restrictive. Use of these licenses may be an issue regarding proprietary or paid-for licensing models. There are different flavours of this. The GPL is more restrictive than the LGPL, but essentially if the code base of the target software includes open source software subject to a restrictive license, that could mean that the software product as a whole must be licensed further on the terms of the relevant OS license. If the requirement is triggered, the entire source code might have to be published in source code form. Open source code that is subject to such a license is often referred to as viral, because the license terms mean that if only a small proportion of OS code is used in a larger piece of proprietary software, then the larger proprietary software would become licensed on the same terms, having been infected by the OS code.
Another concept to be mindful of, particularly when viral open source software is involved, is the concept of derivative works. For example, the GPL 2.0 license, which is one of the more restrictive licenses, provides that any derivative work must be licensed as a whole at no charge to all third parties. The use of the term derivative works has been a source of some confusion. However, the GPL license also goes on to define what derivative works are, which is essentially anything that in whole or in part contains or is derived from the open source software program.